Did you know that there is a war going on right now for the possession of you, me, and all of heaven and earth? Since just after the creation of earth, one of the most majestic beings God ever created, Satan, decided one day that he was going to usurp God. Satan has been in battle with God ever since. And with Adam's sin, we have been pawns in this battle now for about 6,000 years. But God, He has chosen to allow this war for His purposes, and every battle, every time goes God's way. The Bible tells us about this war, its casualties, and the book of Revelation tells us about the end, which was never in doubt. God wins.
The Revelation of Jesus Christ, Chapter 12. The War in Heaven. I think it best to start this lesson with a quote from John MacArthur, as I believe he helps to put the events we are reading about in the best order. Though chapter 11 records the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the effects it produces are not described until chapters 15 through 18. The seventh trumpet will sound near the end of the tribulation, launching the brief but final and devastating bowl judgments just before Christ's return in power and glory. Chapters 6 through 11 describe the events of the tribulation up to the sounding of the seventh trumpet. Chapters 12 to 14 recapitulate that same period, describing events from Satan's vantage point. In addition, the latter section takes the reader all the way back to the original rebellion of Satan. The chronological narrative of the tribulation event then resumes in chapter 15. I believe that one of the things that makes the book of Revelation so difficult for people, myself included, to understand is twofold. First, so much is happening in the spiritual realm, a place that obviously we are not really familiar with. Second, the chronology jumps around, backwards, present, and future, and not necessarily in that order. Then, I need to add a third point, which Walvoord describes beautifully. Chapter 12 is the most symbolic chapter in the Bible's most symbolic book. And with that in mind, let's look at Revelation 12, 1-2. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. What does it mean, a great sign? The word sign is a word that points to a reality, something that symbolizes something that is real. This is the first of 7 signs mentioned in the last half of the book of Revelation. Revelation 12:3, 13:13-14, chapter 15, verse 1, chapter 16, verse 14, and then chapter 19, verse 20. We'll look at each of them as we get to their chapters. The description great is from the Greek mega, appearing 4 additional times in this chapter. Verse 3, a great red dragon. Verse 9, the great dragon. Verse 12, great wrath of the devil. And verse 14, a great eagle. It seems that at least in this part of John's vision, everything he sees is large, huge even, either in its physical size or its importance. I suspect that it may be a little bit of both. Let's move to our first controversy, the woman. Who is she? The Catholic Church believes and teaches that this woman is Mary, the human mother of Jesus. The Catholic Church is wrong. The easiest proof of that is this woman is persecuted during the last half of the tribulation. Mary, on the other hand, has been in heaven now for almost 2,000 years. The second incorrect but common misidentification of this woman is that she represents the church. That also doesn't make sense when you understand the son she is giving birth to is Christ. The church did not give birth to Christ. Christ gave birth to the church. Also, the church is the virgin bride of Christ and would not be depicted as pregnant. The only identification that fits this context is the woman represents Israel. The child she is about to give birth to is the Messiah. The passage is also a close parallel to a dream given to Joseph in Genesis 37, 9-11. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, Lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. John MacArthur gets a little bit esoteric in his interpretation of the woman being clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet references. He mentions Israel's glory, brilliance, dignity, and exalted status. I wouldn't say that he was wrong. I just don't see it. Why would God be spotlighting the glory and exalted status of Israel as he is sending her through the tribulation? Doesn't make sense to me anyhow. I am much more comfortable with the symbol standing for the 12 tribes that make up Israel and Joseph's parents, which is the interpretation in Genesis. Jacob speaking, Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? But that is just my girl logic. Walver doesn't really comment, so he is not helpful here. The crown the woman is wearing is a Stephanos crown symbolizing victory. While not yet completed, Israel will persevere through the tribulation, just as she has, through God, persevered throughout a history of satanic persecution. God has made promises to Israel that have yet to be fulfilled. Israel will be victorious over Satan. Satan and all of his attempts to destroy her will not prevail. Ever. No, not ever. God will fulfill every promise that he has made to Israel. Next, we are given a little history regarding Satan. Revelation 12:3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems. Here we have another shuffling on the timeline of events and the introduction of a new character, the great red dragon. We do not need to guess the identity of the dragon, as he is identified in verse 9 as Satan. While Satan is not a real physical dragon, well, at least we don't believe so, a dragon is in almost every culture a terrifying symbol. John MacArthur tells us that the Hebrew word for serpent used in Genesis 3:1 is used interchangeably in some texts with the Hebrew word for dragon. Here's a Pam side note. Throughout history, cultures around the world have had dragon legends. It is my belief that there were some species of what we now refer to as dinosaurs that were still alive after the flood. Yes, Noah had baby dinosaurs on the ark. Those animals gave rise to dragon legends until they were hunted to extinction. Just as many fear snakes because of their association with Satan, some dinosaurs have also gotten a bad rap. The reference to Satan being a dragon is a symbol of his fierceness and power. Next, this dragon is described as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. John MacArthur believes that this is symbolic of Satan's rule over the earth from the fall of man until the end of the tribulation, when he is completely defeated. He speculates that the 7 heads wearing 7 diadems, which are royal crowns, symbolize 7 consecutive world empires: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and Antichrist's future empire. Walvard, however, believes that the 7 heads and 10 horns refer to the original 10 kingdoms of Daniel 7:7-8, of which 3 were subdued by the little horn, who is to be identified with the world ruler of the Great Tribulation, who reigns over the revived Roman Empire. Daniel 7:7-8. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up from among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. I can see logic in both of these suppositions. Maybe there is some measure of correctness in both. But ruling the earthly kingdoms is not Satan's only domain. We learn that during his rebellion against God, Satan took 1/3 of the heavenly angels with him in his rebellion. Revelations 12:4a. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to earth. Until reading John MacArthur's commentary, I don't believe I ever really thought very hard about just how many angels God must have created, or how many of those are now demons working for Satan. We saw in Revelation 5:11 that the number of holy angels around the throne of God were thousands and thousands and myriads. We learn that myriads was not an exact number, but a phrase the Greeks used for more than they could count. We also learned in Revelation 9 that demons numbering 200 million were released from near the river Euphrates, and that doesn't even include the demon locust army, of which we are not given account. Those were just the demons that were, or are currently, locked up. There must be double, triple, or even more that are running loose in our world. My mind cannot think of how many holy angels and demons that there actually are. But that is a side trail. Who is Satan, and what has he been doing, and how is he fighting his war against God? Ezekiel gives us a description of Satan before his fall. Ezekiel is prophesying to the human king of Tyre, but also to the demonic power behind the human king, Satan himself. Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the ruby, the topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the lapis lazuli, the turquoise, and the emerald, and the gold. The workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. Isaiah gives us more insight into Satan as he describes the sin that was the fall of Satan. Like Ezekiel, Isaiah is prophesying to a human power and the satanic power behind him. In this case, the king of Babylon. And here, while I don't claim enough knowledge, I believe God in this prophecy found in the 14th chapter of Isaiah is referencing both the historical Babylon as well as the future Babylon that will be the capital of the Antichrist short earthly kingdom during the tribulation. which we will study in a later chapter. But regarding Satan's original sin, Isaiah 14:12-14. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly. In the recesses of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. We are all aware of how, after his fall from grace, Satan came down to earth, deceived Eve, and tempted Adam, bringing about the fall of mankind, spiritual death, a cursed creation, and the temporary transfer of the earth from mankind to Satan. We also know that God was not going to let this rebellion stand. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, the battle lines in the war between God and Satan are set. Genesis 3:15, God speaking. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. God tells us the seed of the woman would bruise the head of Satan. Over the centuries, Satan has been trying to prevent God from fulfilling his promises to his people. Satan knows that he, Satan, wins if only one promise of God is thwarted. Satan tried to stop God when Cain killed Abel. Adam had other sons. He tried to pollute beyond redemption men in the world before the flood of Noah. God had Noah build an ark. God promised the Messiah would come through Abraham, then through Judah, then through David. Finally, the seed of the woman from the line of David was born, and Satan was there. Revelation 12:4b. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Satan used Herod to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem and surrounding areas, trying to kill the baby Messiah. God sent the family to Egypt until the danger was past. Finally, Satan and his demons, I'm sure, partied for days, 3 days actually, until Jesus rose from the dead, having defeated the curse for all who would believe. Revelation 12:5. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now the narrative in chapter 12 moves back to the tribulation period. Revelation 12:6. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. One way that we know we are back in the tribulation time period is the mention of 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. The time period is the second half of the tribulation. We know it is not the first 3.5 years, as the Antichrist mostly lives up to his peace treaty with the Jews during the first half. There is a promise in this verse. God tells the woman, Israel, to flee into the wilderness where he will care for her during this time. There is a parallel scripture in Matthew 24:15-22, Jesus speaking. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Where is this wilderness? Where is this mountaintop that the Jews are to flee to? We don't know. John MacArthur's guess is that it is probably somewhere east of the Jordan River and south of the Dead Sea, in a territory formerly occupied by Moab, Ammon, and Edom, which is in the modern-day Jordan. MacArthur gets his opinion from Daniel 11:40-41. At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he will enter countries, overflowing them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. But these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Which is interesting, as the number one common guess among prophecy teachers is that the Jews will flee to the ancient city of Petra, which is in modern-day Jordan. Currently, Israel and Jordan are at peace since the treaty was signed by the two countries in 1994. Whether it is at Petra or somewhere else, those who heed the warning and flee will be supernaturally protected by God until Christ physically returns. Let's move on. Revelation 12:7-9. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. We could talk about how spiritual beings fight wars. Can angels be injured? Can angels die? How is a spiritual war fought? We could talk, but it would be nothing but speculation. We don't know. We don't have a clue, and we won't know this side of heaven. We know that this war has been going on in various ways with smaller battles since Satan's fall near the beginning of time as we know it. While there is much that we don't know about this cosmic war, we do know at this juncture, probably at the middle of the tribulation, God seems to have had enough. His purposes for allowing this to continue in the first place must be almost complete. The war is about to end. And you know what? The end was never in doubt. There has never been any battle that did not go God's way and serve God's purpose. And now, Satan and his demon hordes who have been allowed up until this point to tromp around in heaven are about to be evicted permanently. I personally believe that this is the event that causes Satan to take off the gloves, so to speak, and to go into a fury. I believe at this point he physically possesses the human who is Antichrist. This is when he goes into the temple and demands worship as God, little g. I think this because of what we read in 12:13. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. When I think of this scene as a sci-fi fan, I can't help to get a picture of an Avengers movie where Loki comes to Earth and demands people to worship him. And then later in the movie, Loki says, "I am a god," at which point Hulk throws him around like a rag doll, slamming him into the floor repeatedly. And Hulk's comment to Loki, who is looking up from the hole made by his body being slammed repeatedly on the floor? Puny God. I don't know if the Archangel Michael will be taking a page out of the Avengers movie, but I do know that Satan is tossed out of heaven on his tush, never ever to be allowed back in. And what happens in heaven? Revelation 12:10-12. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. As they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. The holy angels of God are rejoicing in what God has done. And I think that maybe we are rejoicing also. While the heavenly saints are not mentioned, I believe we, like John who represents us, are seeing all of this as it happens from heaven. I think we will see in real heavenly time all that John saw in his vision 2,000 years ago. All the events happening in heaven declare God's glory. Why would he stick his people in a separate room and close their eyes? All of God's redeemed, the Old Testament saints, the New Testament church, and the tribulation saints were affected by Satan throughout our lives. We have a stake in his final defeat. I believe that God will want us to see and rejoice in the work of his hands and his will, so that we can give him the glory that is due to him. So Satan is full of wrath, and he knows he only has a short time before it is all over, and he knows that he will be locked in the abyss. I do not know his motivations. Does he think he still has a chance to win even one battle? Or is he strictly acting out like a small child and determining that if he can't win, he's taken as many to perdition with him as possible, as painfully as possible? Whatever his motives, Satan's fury against the Jews rages with a fury never before seen. But God. Revelation 12:13-17. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. Let's look a little closer and give our best guesses as to what is happening. We won't know exactly, but we can give some educated biblical guesses. Verse 14. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. What is this eagle? One option that has been given is that this is a military evacuation of the Jews by America. 40 years ago, I believed this was possible. Today, I laugh at that speculation. By this time, America is no longer a world superpower. Also, our country, especially our government leaderships that was left without any conscience when the Christians were raptured, is just as anti-Semitic as the rest of the world. No, America will not be coming to the rescue. This rescue might be 100% supernatural, using no human means. Maybe this rescue is being led by that 4th living being we saw in chapter 4, 6, and 7. And before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal, and in the center and around the throne the 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. The first creature was like a lion, and the second creature like a calf, and the third creature had a face like that of a man, and the 4th creature was like a flying eagle. Or maybe God allows a human means, such as the Israeli Air Force, or possibly, since it is likely that they are also fleeing to some area of Jordan. It is possible that Jordan itself participates in the evacuation. We just don't know. We only know that those whom God has chosen flee. You might ask, how do they know where to go? That is a good question. My guess is that part of the message of the 144,000 is that this would happen, and that when it did, they were to flee and go to this hiding place to be protected by God. That is my speculation, but it makes sense to me. What does Satan do in his rage, especially as he realizes that many of the Jews he hates have escaped? Verses 15 and 16. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. Again, interesting. What is this water, and how does the earth itself help the Jews? Let's look at two possible scenarios. I don't know, I'm only guessing answers. One supernatural, another half supernatural. First, the water. Is the water H2O water, in which case it is somewhat easy to see how the land could just absorb the water before it reached Petra? Or could the flood be an army of people? If it is a human army that Satan sends, how could the earth help? Well, it has happened before. Scriptures record in Numbers chapter 16 a rebellion against Moses. Korah and his buddies thought there needed to be a change of leadership and that they were the ones to take over. I'm not going to read the entire chapter, just the end of their particular rebellion in Numbers 16:27 to 33. So they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, Abram, and Dathan and Abram came out and stood at the doorway of their tents, along with their wives and their sons and their little ones. Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these deeds, for this is not my doing. If these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand that these men have spurned the Lord." As he finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and their households, and all the men who belonged to Korah with all their possessions. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. So, about the earth opening up and swallowing people alive, it happened before. Obviously, it could happen again. A little side note. Did you notice the people went down alive to Sheol? I hadn't noticed this before, but apparently my guess that at least Sheol, the temporary abode of the unrighteous dead, if not the final internal hell, is in fact located inside the earth. So Satan may break some dam and send water. He may send a flood of soldiers, or it may be something else we haven't considered. But the results will be the same. Israel will be nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Those who heeded the warning, whatever its source, will be supernaturally protected from the terrors to come in the second half of the tribulation, the Great Tribulation. But not all of the Jews believed or will be able to escape. When Satan realizes that there is a supernatural godly protection on those that fled and that he is powerless to hurt them, he turns his attention to those that don't escape. Revelation 12:17. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who kept the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Next week, chapter 13, we learn more about Satan. We are also introduced to his right-hand demon, the false prophet, and the mark of the beast is initiated. Literally, all hell is about to break loose. Questions?